Let's start with a prayer. Dear Father, what a friend we have in Jesus. He is our friend and ultimate Savior of mankind. Jesus showed enduring love for his believers by sacrificing his own life so that we might have eternal life. Help us to love him, praise him, and share his message of salvation with the world. Amen. Refreshments today were delicious as always, thanks to Anne and Shelley. We appreciate it very much. And let's go on with, Willie has a list or a thing of the directions, of the directory. We're going to pass it around to make sure. My name, we need you. They say I'm not
presenting another book.
Oh, we're waiting on you.
Can you talk into it for me?
Okay, I'm talking. Can you hear any better? Can you tell anything? Okay, Willie, go ahead and start your list from the directory.
Okay.
So we're just
If there are any corrections, go ahead and correct them. Or if you want to become a member and be in our directory, please sign up on the third sheet.
It doesn't get put into this summer, but they are asking that we get it turned in, as soon as we get the corrections made. So check your phone numbers and email and all that, and we'll have it ready to go when it's time to. Now, back to refreshments. Jane, where has Jane Blackbird gone? She's back in the kitchen. She has held this job for 5 years, and she would love to have a replacement starting in the fall. Pretty much, Jane, correct me if I tell this wrong, but pretty much she has her list of months, and she asks for volunteers. And have you ever really had a terrible problem where we couldn't get it filled up, where people
I
didn't
think the
sign up?
biggest problem was one day, there was no coffee in First Presbyterian.
Yes, I do remember that day. Not Jane's fault, however. They ran out on Sunday. It must have been a big coffee day on Sunday. So anyway, we're throwing this out to see a volunteer would be the best possible solution to the problem before we start calling. So anyway, we're just throwing that out. Any more questions you have about it? I'm sure you've all noticed her list, her clipboard that she keeps back on the table with the months where it's listed, who's doing it. And it's nice to have at least a couple people down for a month so it doesn't fall on one person alone to do it. So anyway, give that some thought. I'm going to do something now. I'm going to say something I've never said before from up here. I'm going to recommend a book, and I've never done that before. My almost 30-year-old grandson called me a couple weeks ago, and he said, "Gee," he says, you've got to, they've made it into a documentary type on Apple TV. It's a 36-minute film. It actually won the Academy Award for its category on Sunday night. And I'm just going to pass it along. I came very close to telling Shelley, I think we could do a book review on this book. It's something that I'm sure children enjoy, but an adult gets the full, can read so much more into what the message is. It's the boy, the mole, the fox, and the horse. The boy, the mole, the fox, and the horse. It's written by Charlie Maxey. Okay, is that any better yet?
No.
Okay, we'll just keep going in the meantime. I loved it. That's all and Jim loved it. We both loved it, and I passed it along to a lot of people. I don't, it is a children's book too, and yeah. So I just put that down if you're interested, and if you can watch watch it, it's a wonderful, the illustrations, it's outstanding. So, I'm kind of putting off calling Jane up until we have everything operating, so I'm just, I would like to say, speaking of books though, Shelley is coming along very well. She's very close to a full schedule for next year, and she plans, if possible, to have that ready by the end of this year, so we all have kind of a summer reading if we want to get started on the books. She'll have it. Becca.
Grace, we used to always have a children's book on the list. We always had.
Really?
We always had a Texas book, a Christmas book, a children's book, because that's the first time I read, what is her name?
Were you thinking of a children's author?
Yes.
Beverly Cleary.
No, it's the one who wrote all the series.
If at any time you think of it, just yell it out.
But anyway, I'm just saying that it would not be unusual.
I have thought long and hard about in the last 2 weeks,
It
mentioning
would
them
not
to
be
Shelley.
unusual,
I haven't looked up any of his other books, but we'll keep that in mind.
Rowling, J.T. Rowling.
Okay, yes.
I mean, Hillary's Harry Potter series, which was really written as a children's series. And
Absolutely.
it was one of our,
Absolutely.
when it first came out, one that we read. But
Yeah.
And we did try to schedule that early in the fall so it could turn into a Christmas present. We thought it was wonderful for one of our grandchildren.
that would be a great
I
idea.
even thought of it as a December book too. It still would be from the second week, it still is time before Christmas. But, yeah, I was very taken with it, enough so that when my grandson called this weekend on Saturday, why, we had quite the discussion about it. And,
So he read the book or he saw the
he actually, and in my second conversation about it with him, when I thanked him after we saw it, he admitted that it was actually his wife who had found it. And so, but he's very taken with it. He's the one promoting it, but credit where credit is due. And so anyway, I just wanted to pass that along, and we'll see. I think we're going to go ahead because I don't want to show Jane up. If we could start the camera, so at least we're taping her. Why?
It's on.
It's on?
Yeah.
Okay, how about that? Okay. Jane Hansen. She has been reviewing, I don't know how many years, because she's been doing it longer than I've been coming. I can hear I'm on now. And so anyway, we are so happy to have her with us today, and she will be doing the book lady for us today. We always look forward to it, and we're honored to have you again this year, Jane, that you work us into your schedule every year. She does teach English to many fortunate students, I might add, at San Antonio College. Thank you, Jane, and I'm not going to take up any more time. Let's move on to Jane.
I've been at San Antonio College for 40 years. So I'm just a child, as you are aware. The Bookwoman's Daughter is a new release from our author, and it extends the same sort of story with her adopted daughter, Honey, from this book. And so you might be very much interested in it. It's I'm only about a third of the way into it. It's just as lovely, thought-provoking, mind-rattling as all of Richardson's works. Richardson is most known for The Unbreakable Child. I don't know if you've read this book. She, with her sisters, was an orphan in an orphanage system in Kentucky, run by an order of Catholic nuns. She and her sisters and 40 other of the kids from that orphanage were the first people to receive a moneyed settlement as victims of institutional abuse. And so she deals with these kinds of complications of human life. And astoundingly, she is a person who is able to put one foot in front of the other, just keep moving. So for a group of Roman Catholic nuns, Sisters of Charity of Nazareth, to have to pay the settlement was a really huge success. And she tries to focus on these kinds of concerns in most of her work. So she's going to deal with stigma. She's going to deal with unknown history, some of those things that maybe we don't remember. When I first started reading the book, the vernacular struck me as like my dad. He's from Southern Ohio. Not a lot of difference between Southern Ohio and Kentucky sometimes. And as far as we know, when we think about the Alleghenies and the Appalachians, we do take a certain sort of context with us maybe. When I was a kid, I thought that's where all of the American songbook came from, you know, all of those ballads that my dad would sing. And so the banjo, the guitar, the violin, maybe we make connections like, I don't know, Deliverance. But from reading a variety of novels about the Appalachians, what you figure out is that these are some hardscrabble folks who make a living however they can figure it out. And that they have just as many problems as all the rest of us do, whether we're urban or rural. Kim Richardson touches on the storytelling tradition very strongly in the way that she reveals these complicated life stories with a great deal of dignity. She wants to deal with that element of reader understanding. Can we come to a different perspective if we read a little bit about the good, the middling, and the ugly, especially poverty, teen homelessness. She deals most of the time with developing empathy. How do people develop empathy? Well, we fall in love with each other, and then we can't do without each other because, wow, you're a compelling person. I just really like you. And we see that in this little novel, that to learn about people, you have to learn about the human landscape, to learn about history, location, suffering, and joy. That's the full measure of human life. Not always happy, not always completely fulfilling, sometimes unimaginably challenging, especially for a woman. In terms of books and book contexts, this is a very popular book. It's been endorsed by Dolly Parton, who has used her fortune, or at least part of it, to make sure that children have had the benefit of upwards of 200 million books in the first 5 years of their life. And she continues to extend that, so not just to her home state of Tennessee and to kids in poverty, but also kids from all different backgrounds, and she's spreading out internationally as well. Just to underscore, people from the mountains believe in books. Yeah, there's some suspicion. Let's pick a person in the room who doesn't have a suspicion. Or a superstition, I don't know. My husband always, that game with the sidewalk, and you step on a crack, you break it. It never breaks your mother's back, but he always says it. It's, you know, how many years have we said that now? But we have some superstitions. You know, the animal rescue folks want you to take your black cat in the house around Halloween because of superstitions, and so all of that makes up the human package, and she certainly deals with presenting the ways that we might develop a bias, you know, those country people, and ways that we can back away from it, and that is certainly getting to know each other. So this is actually inspired by the 1935 Pack Horse Librarians of the WPA, which is pretty amazing. Oh, I thought that was mine. My dad graduated high school in 1936 from a rural high school in Ridgeway, Ohio. I think there were 14 of them. Maybe there were 17, I can't remember. He talks about how visiting people would come in their wagons when he was a boy. His dad was a mercantilist as well as a farmer because he had all these kids. He could take off and sell pots and pans or whatever. And I think my dad grew up understanding how to use the land to advantage. His first gift to my mother after they married and moved to the farm was he trapped a coat for her, a muskrat coat, which I now have in my closet. And so a real nice piece of handiwork, not unlike what people would do in the mountains. It's inexpensive, and they were overrunning his land, thank you very much, and they're taking all his game, so gonna kill him, gonna use him and put it back into the land. So this is tinted by the Great Depression, and my folks could always use something over and over again until it was useless. It is kin to good ecology, I guess, reusing and repurposing materials. And so as a backdrop for this story, if you want to look at some of the imagery of the librarians on pack horse or mules, go to the Library of Congress. There's a very nice collection of photographs that you can access. And it looks like a lot of fun. But what we learn in the book, of course, is that you can't always trust your mule, or your horse for that matter. They are contrary, they have personalities, and all of that really comes to the fore. As far as the background of being blue-skinned, wow, what a question. What if you were blue-skinned? You know, I used to dye my hair blue, so I kind of liked the idea for a while, and then I read this book and came to understand that that people really worry about the way we look. I have a friend who has a skin condition it's just a thing. It's not contagious, and the people at her gym were not very nice to her. They accused her of infecting them all, like she had athlete's foot or something. And so at the same time I read this book, she was describing this experience to me where, you know, she thought she was in an environment where working out was a good thing, and being out there doing the work. As I dove into this book, it made me really curious about the Fugate family. They have a 200-year tradition of living in the mountains, and they are known as the Blue People of Kentucky. The strange skin anomaly causes them to isolate increasingly. And so as the generations multiply, they go farther indoors. If they can mine, as we learned in the story, they come out dark. People are less likely to react to their blue skins. And that really made me think about the funny things that come through genetics. We always talk about you have grandpa's nose or great aunt so-and-so's ears. But in this case, people were blue in Kentucky through 1975. And so the treatment that is talked about in the book for, I'm going to try to say this properly, methemoglobulinemia. It means that you have less than 1% of that material in your blood, generally due to a genetic disorder, but you can develop blue skin if you are exposed to chemicals like benzocaine and xylocaine, and you don't have a way to get it out of your system, except through these lovely blue pills. What the diagnosis tells us, the medical perspective says that people often have purple lips and chocolate blood. So instead of your blood being bright red, it would be kind of a milk chocolate color. And that's a manifestation of this genetic blue disorder. Now, if they take their methylene blue tablets every day, even though they make most people feel a little funny, most of those descendants now have normal skin color, but when they get angry and flush or get cold, and you know your cheeks turn bright red, well, theirs might turn blue. Those are the cases where it can continue to show up. And so ordinarily when babies are born at the hospital blue, right, there's a rush to oxygenate. For these children, there's nothing wrong. Most of the time it doesn't do a lot of damage. In the mountains, what really happens is that people are under nutrition. They don't have access often to the things that keep them from pellagra and other nutritionally, they're deprivation diets, right? So folks who eat a lot of corn or corn products, and exclusively so. So it's common in Africa as well as in rural mountain areas in the U.S. until about the late 1960s, early 70s. And so that was my fascinating look at the blue skin feature. And one researcher said that given vogues and trends since the Middle Ages, a preference for skin color may be ingrained by experience. And so if you grow up around a bunch of blue people, it's not strange. Wow. A kind of a dough moment. My two favorite characters in the book aren't really the lead characters, they're the mule, Junia, and the landscape. I have a very strong memory. My father picked me up, put me on the back of a donkey, which kicked and threw me across the yard, and I went sliding, and my dad just, you're fine. And I guess I was, I'm still here. And the landscape of Kentucky itself, and I just remember, we would go back and forth from here to Ohio, and once you get into the Bluegrass Parkway, it is really beautiful. And my brother loved it because he could go like 80 miles an hour, it was legal. But there were these huge patches of really pastoral landscape, the intensity of green, which we don't have in Texas unless we have a lot of rain. And so those really reminded me a great deal of things that I've experienced through my childhood with my dad, who, he thought nothing of, let's go to an orchard and pick apples. Before we moved to Texas, that was something he would ordinarily do with us right before Halloween. Instead of candy, we had apples. And so I was saying that I thought the landscape was a really strong character. It's the first image, first page in the book, Kentucky, 1936. The librarian and her mule spotted it at the same time. The creature's ears shot up and it came to a stop so sudden its front hooves skidded out, the pannier slipping off, spilling out the librarian's books. An eddy of dirt and debris lifted, stinging the woman's eyes. The mule struggled to look upward, backward, anywhere other than at the thing in front of it. The bookwoman couldn't keep her eyes off the spectacle as she shortened the reins and clamped her legs around the mule's sides. Again she prodded her mount. Bearing tall, sassing teeth, the beast lifted its muzzle into the balsam-sweetened air, the quavering brays blistering the sleepy mountain. What description. So, you can paint pictures with this person's description, her ability to focus on those kinds of painting moments. And so, is part of the way that she draws our attention away from the suffering so much. Suffering in the midst of almost unbearable beauty is certainly something all of us have had to confront, even day to day. And so, as you continue reading the book, she moves us into modern life in the mountains. Immediately, our heroine, Cussie, is confronted with the idea that she needs to be married to be safe. Her father is very worried about her. This is not an uncommon perspective in 1936. I'm pretty sure my dad said that it might be a good idea for me to get married too. I wasn't opposed to it, but he wasn't going to tell me who. He just wanted to make sure that, you know, good people. But when you're in fear of something, when you're so worried that your daughter might not be safe, especially if you have black lung, which it seems her father has, worrying about what's going to happen to a 19-year-old daughter would be pretty scary in 1936. And so her father's worried about marrying her off. Cussie called over his shoulder, "Before your mama passed, I promised her I'd see to it that you got yourself respectability. But I've nearly gone busted buying candles to get you some. Let this stick on fire, daughter." He hoisted the old wrought iron candle holder higher by its iron-forged rat tail, and once more played with the wooden slide, moving the taper up and down inside the spiral coil. "I've got a respectable life," I said quietly, following him out to the porch, taking a seat on the wooden chair, and huddling under the patchwork eiderdown I dragged along. The first day of January brought a skiff of snow to our house in Cove. Pa set the candle down and struck a match to light a lantern hanging from the porch. So here we're in a sort of a flashback to an earlier time. Maybe we think more innocent. My mother would say, insulation was not that good. She'd talk about the clothing that she could wear to walk to school in the snow, which was not waterproof. And so any of those kinds of activities would lead to more cold and discomfort than we might be suffering these days. And her father's using a candle in the house. So you want to think about using a candle in your house. Was your electricity out recently? And you had to resort to that old-fashioned bit. She writes, a taper would be cranked up tall to burn for a long visit or tamped down short for any beau Elijah Carter didn't favor as a good suitor. So her dad is lighting the house appropriately to entice these bachelors. If I'm married, the WPA will fire me. Please, I'm a librarian now. Why, even Eleanor Roosevelt approves. And so it astounded me that well into the 1960s, pregnant teachers were asked to resign as well. I don't think kids paid any attention at all to that. They just knew that was what was happening at home probably, or somewhere in the family. So as I read, I'm constantly comparing and contrasting. Wow, what a break. You know, I didn't have to do that. But certainly I know my dad did. They didn't have an indoor toilet for a very long time. And so it was after World War II when my grandfather had indoor plumbing like that. And so he would write funny letters to my dad in sort of this vernacular about how he was so fast, he could turn off that electric light and get into bed before the light was out. And so it reminded me of this kind of storytelling. And I'm fascinated with the way that the author handles these really difficult passages, because you read it and you know that it's suffering, and you know that you're kind of cringing inside, but at the same time, you want to keep reading because you really want to know what's going to happen next. So it's really kind of a wonderful human book. She confronts not just safety and protection, but she talks about union activism. These are things that were sort of under pressure at the time. American people were on two different sides of the aisle, so to speak. Some folks in favor of those Roosevelt actions, some folks not really happy with them. And then the perspective on reformers coming into various locations and trying to impose their cultural values without necessarily knowing what the neighborhood is really all about and what strong values already exist. So it's a really long historical perspective in a very different expression. I thought it was pretty refreshing. Simply because when you're reading a history text, you know, even if they're really well written, sometimes you kind of want to stop and go, okay, that's enough lesson for now. But these lessons seem to have more impact and less, engender less impatience in me, I guess. So when Cussie talks with her father about marrying and about being familiar with living in Kentucky, he'd say, well, you have a chance to marry someone who's not the same as you, someone who can get you out of here. That's why I did coal and why I work for Scratch. And so I think you can hear his fear. He's just not sure what's going to happen to her. She has a really good reputation as a bookwoman. He just doesn't see that that's going to take care of her. Also, a lot of people were leery of our looks. Though with Paul working with coal, his mostly pale blue skin didn't bother folks when all miners came out of the hole looking much the same. But I didn't have coal to disguise me in black or white Kentucky. I didn't have myself an escape until I got in the precious book route. In some of those old dark tree pockets, my young patrons would glimpse me riding my pack horse, toting a pannier full of books, and they'd light a smile and call out, "Yonder comes Bookwoman! Bookwoman's here!" And I'd forget all about my peculiarity and why I had it and what it meant for me. And so, you know, here she is in all of her pride and glory, has a moment to forget that she's outside the tradition of comfort of the folks in her neighborhood. And so a little bit of scapegoating on those blue people. They're responsible for all the bad things that ever happen. And well, we all know that that's not true, that we might be suspicious of what's going on in the neighbor's backyard, but probably most of the time it's a relatively normal kind of activity. The idea of risking one's job by being a married person is pretty outside of our purview in 2023. But she tells us that Cussie not only lives for the joy of bringing books and reading material to the hill folk who were desperate for visits. The printed word brought a hopeful world into their dreary lives and dark hollers. It was necessary. And for the first time in my life, I felt necessary. So what a wonderful feeling after being on the outside of the way that people consider us to become important. The idea of the library coming in a pack on a horse's back or on a mule's back is just fascinating. Kind of like the bookmobile that used to park at Handy Andy, and you know, how many books would they let you carry out? I think 10. I think 10 was the number, but you know, that was such a treat. We didn't have to go to the public library for. And then I referenced earlier the folks that fall in love with Cussie, and Angeline is really important because she too is a blue person, and inside the blue person culture there are still not suspicions, but great concerns and scapegoating, and the baby will be blue and we'll be on the outside, we won't be acceptable. And so as racism in a very different way seems to be a focus here. It's also sort of an ultimate irony in this family that there seems to be some resistance inside the blue people as well. We can see the level of instruction that Cussie takes on as a person who wants to deliver information and understanding to her hillside neighbors in her development of the community scrapbook, which sounds a lot like some of those organizations that I remember from my mom's time on the farm, and all the ladies who got together and taught the younger new married people how to make pies if they had been farm wives before, and those kinds of things, who shared the secrets about the party line if folks were fortunate enough to have a telephone. And so Angeline looks forward to every interaction she has with Cussie, and she is excited every time to see her. Splitting at the seams, a stained feather bed mattress that had been stuffed partly with straw butted up to a spider-cracked window pane. Angeline's husband lay there by the sill, dozing, the pain tracked across his face. With no money for a doctor, the wound wouldn't heal. The 30-year-old looked scrawnier than the last time I'd seen him. His face had aged like craggy rock, and he had gray patches under his eyes. A splintered axe handle poked out from under the bed where Angela must have placed it, hoping there was truth in the old superstition it would cut a person's pain. Angela put a hand on her husband's shoulder and gently shook him awake. It's Monday and she's finally back, Willie. Right here she is, he grimaced. I brought you a Popular Mechanics, I told him. I didn't expect you back, Widow Fraser. Yes, it's me, bookwoman, and I'm back now. I cringed at my new title, having realized as soon as Eula Foster had addressed me that it would stick. A week ago when I returned to the center, Eula had crossed her unwelcoming arms and called out my new title, a mixture of disappointment and loathing sliding over her snipped greeting. And so, just previous to this, we're not even 30 pages into the book yet, because he's been married off to a man who's 43 years older than she is. And to say that he is unkind is an understatement. He's abusive. And in their honeymoon evening, he is far more abusive than anyone realizes he will be. At the same moment, apparently, he dies of a heart attack. And superstition being predominant in the area, Cussie will now be not just the Widow Fraser, but she might be a murderer, because it must have been her that killed him. Bless her heart. And so her life doesn't really get any easier, but her determination is really what shows here, especially when she's having some conflict and contradiction to think about, and her mule intervenes and protects her. She's having disagreements with her dead husband's family, who blame her for his death. And as we move forward, I keep writing in the margin, this is almost like Foxfire. Do you remember the Foxfire series? It was kind of a resurgence of all of those things that maybe your grandmother taught you, like when you do the dishes, you don't dump the water out, soapy water and ick and all, you take it out and dump it on the rose bush. Because all of that stuff in there, along with the detergent, makes the roses. My grandmother had roses like that in Ohio, but Ohio. but you know, I can remember carrying that dirty dishwater down and dumping it on the roses in order. And so as you read through here, when they talk about the various herbs that grow, the natural features of the land, the things that people do to get by, it's just a reminder that we all used to live much closer to the land than we do. Unless you're gardening, in which case, yay. Yeah, and it reminded me, there's a little novel about wildcrafting called Where the Lilies Bloom. That's a really sweet kid's book about wildcrafting, and what the kids do when there's a death in the family, they figure out what's in the mountains that they can sell. And all they have to do is go get it. All they have to do is gather it. It's really a neat little novel. And so by the time you get to about chapter 13, she's beginning to flesh out her community scrapbooks, which is like it's like a meeting of minds, but she does it in the scrapbook and carries it from home to home. And so whatever tips, ideas, patterns that she can share in addition to the books, she takes that on as well. And so she has a different level of creating community by adding on to this project. It's kind of like those old cookbooks we used to produce from all of the ladies in the church would offer up their best recipes. You know, maybe you get 8 different recipes for macaroni and cheese or what have you. But and so it reminds me of a really sweet way of sharing that information. And, you know, I don't guess they take home ec anymore. I don't know. I took home ec. My mother told me, well, maybe it was a little useless, but you did learn something. Never put the spaghetti in the sauce unless it's cooked. You know, we just made the sauce and broke up the spaghetti and threw it in, and that was very starchy. That is not a recommendation in the scrapbook project. The other thing that I noticed in here is where they're talking about people suffering from malnutrition and pellagra and, you know, all of those diseases they talked to us about when we were little kids. And if you eat this, you won't get that. It fascinated me that, you know, gosh, Dad, did you really eat potatoes every day for years and years? Well, my dad used to talk about they'd have chicken on Sunday. And they had bacon powder biscuits most every day for breakfast and for lunch. Because that's just what that's what they got made in the morning. They had to go milk the cows, they had to check the chickens, and then they went off to school. And so it sort of took me back to how much he grew when he joined the military. So he went from 5'10" to 6'2". And you know, those were sort of force feedings. They had to eat in like 12 minutes. And so Dad said, you know, we just shoveled it in. And it was the first time he'd ever been able to eat that much food in his life. And so his height skyrocketed, really. That's a lot of inches. 4 inches post 18 is a lot. So she's dreaming about her scrapbooks, and in the middle of all of that, she has a bad dream. I awoke in the fat hours of slumber to Junia's furious screams. I lay there trying to rouse from my dream. In the inky blackness, I blinked and rubbed my eyes, listening to the silence. I reached for the candle, struck a match, and peered at my timepiece in the light. Only a few minutes past 4 and still 20 minutes before I rose. I can imagine just lazing there. Now, in this case, Junia has surprised an intruder. Is he alive? I whispered, torn between wishing he weren't and fearful he was. Fraser's head was matted with gore. An ugly gash cratered the forehead, his jaw split to his mouth, and his nose parked to the side, leaking blood. He still has some life in him, Pa said, and is going to be feeling a mite harder if he comes to. I noticed a ring of coal soot around Dad's nose, but his clothes were only lightly dusted, not filthy like usual. Pa, why are you home so early? Mine shut down. One of the sections collapsed and the inspector sent us home. And so we find that Fraser has, Vester Fraser has shown up with a hunting knife and apparently has planned some grand mischief. I'm amazed at the wherewithal of this character in spite of humiliation. in spite of finding a friend with whom she belongs, and then additional layers of humiliation and racism. And, you know, the author touches on miscegenation, which in so many states was illegal. And I think it's the Loving case in Virginia that begins a kind of it's like domino effect from state to state in the 1960s, where less and less the states are trying to regulate what people look like in terms of skin color and who can marry whom. And so I think that one unique bit in this little series now is that blue people are so consistently treated badly. And my little bit of research suggests that there are French blue people, there are Irish blue people, there are a good number of European folks who have this genetic anomaly at the time. Of course, with treatments, it doesn't show forward today. There are some funny little genetic things that happen anyway to people. As an example, my husband's family sounds like they're Herman the German as far back as you could go, but they have a blood anomaly that mostly people of Mediterranean ancestry get. And so, just to say, we can't always predict what our genetics are or what they will do, even in this new age of DNA. I found it really interesting that we get to know Harriet and her desires as a Black librarian to provide the same kinds of services to her own community, and of the ways that our author presents some of those ideas that are unsettling for a good bit of the culture in the 1930s. The idea that librarians spread news is predominant in the book, and all of the librarians, regardless of being blue or not, do something really important for their communities. They provide connection, inspiration, new ideas, dispels some superstitions, and I think also dispels some of the stigmas of Appalachia among their own people. I found it really interesting also that the doctor basically has to bribe her to provide some level of care. And I suppose that Richardson's trying to suggest again about superstition and the ways that even experienced folks have superstitions. They're just kind of built into us as human beings. I suppose built around some of our experiences. And so, and I loved her when they called her Bluette. Such a sweet reference, and then you begin to think about it. And what does that mean? So I think that Richardson's really, you know, making us put on our thinking caps to try to get us to think in some different ways, especially the episode with the doctors, with the nasty medicine. I'm sure maybe you've had an experience where some sort of medicine makes you feel kind of crummy, and you might just rather feel not crummy the way you did before you took it. That seems really human here, even though it's a cure for her blue skin. So from what I read, the treatment, if you take it every day for a pretty long period of time, your body will begin to rectify itself. all, this is one of those little books that I would read over and over again. And I've read it, I think, twice and a half. And I keep going back to Queenie's letter towards the end of the book. And I found it really interesting. She says, Cussie says, this is my very first friendship letter. And she kisses the letter. Dearest Cussie, we made it to Philadelphia safely. I rented an apartment 14 blocks from the library, and it's crowded with 5 of us in this tiny 2-room flat with no porch or hills to escape to. Philadelphia is gray from its bootstraps to the top of its tall concrete buildings. The city nights are without stars, and I miss that the most. It's hot, noisy, and never beds itself. How odd that Troublesome rises late out of its smoky blue shadows and struggles for the light when the city won't shut off its blinding one. There are beggars on the streets everywhere you look. One thief stole my bag, and another knocked down my young heir and snatched his hat. Hunger abounds. Men, women, and children stand in long food lines for their meals. It's hectic here, and folks are always busy flittering about like bees. I wish you could see this big city and the people skittering to and fro. The white folk in this big place don't even look at me like they do in Troublesome. The library is big, bigger than the whole town of Troublesome. I haven't seen all of it, but my boss, Mr. Paget, promises to take a day off soon and show me around. Mr. Paget is from England and calls me a quick study. He says I'm a capable female and smart enough Negro. He's urged me to apply to the Hampstead Institute Library School and insists on giving me a letter. Write to me soon, honey. God bless you and your papa, Queenie Johnson. Such a sweet letter. And so I'm thinking, well, Richardson wants to remind us the difference of the city and rural settings in 1936. I mean, if you drove from here to Bulverde, that's just the last 30 years have changed, and it's almost overwhelming, all those apartments. What used to be really just some rolling hills in the Texas Hill Country. Not grudging anybody a place to live, but wow, it sure was pretty up there. And it makes me think about moving to cities, right? I always say that I can't go outside and always look at the stars in San Antonio, because we got a lot of clouds here, but nonetheless, you have to go farther and farther out of the city to see that. And it's kind of a surprise, maybe an interesting reflection that in writing about 1936, there are definitely folks who are saying, you know, that those cities can't do everything you want to in a city. It's kind of an interesting perspective. Just to say that this whole book asks all of us readers to really think about what it means to help each other and to be a part of a community and to truly support each other without understanding or caring whether we're freckled or purple or blue or whatever color we happen to be. And that maybe while poverty is a bad thing, especially when our access to medical care might be limited, and even to simple solutions for being blue, all of it can be a pretty amazing journey if we can manage the fear and the humiliation. And the other part that's so astounding is the lovely way that the book ends. The gift from Angeline to Cussie, the assurance that there are people who love her, even if they're not traditionally the same sort of people who should love her. And that kind of is the truth about human beings. We fall in love with whoever strikes us in that way, and the more experience we have, the more attractive people are out there, and we're bound to learn more than less. And I think that's where our author leaves us, that we should try to, as much as possible, support our communities, prevent abuse, and bring to the forefront those parts of our culture and our practice as human beings that are really valuable. So anything that pulls us together, like book circles and dinner parties and community scrapbooks, those are the good bits in the middle of all of the challenging parts of being human. And so we'll see what Honey does in this book, as we find there's some hiding from the law, a little more influence from the pack house librarians, and that's about as far as I've gone so far there. If you have some questions, I'd be happy to try to answer them for you. Don't know if I have any more insights than you do.
Jane?
Yes, ma'am.
I don't know if any of you had heard of the Blue People before you read this book or not, but Jim and I, when we were first married, lived in Louisville, Kentucky. And no, I did not see any Blue People, but it was a known fact. They talk about it, regularly, that you go into the hills and you'll see Blue People. And so they really did exist, and pretty good number from the sounds of it.
Yeah, my dentist would say they were different in the hills, which I guess was enough.
Mm-hmm.
So, read this book. And then read that book.
Thank you, Jane. I'll agree with her to read the next book. I've finished it, and I'm not going to give anything away, but it's really, it picks right up where the other one leaves off, and it takes you right on, and it's very good. It's very good. And you're amazed by the things that stayed the same, even with a different generation. Some things don't change, and then what things do. It's very interesting. So next month in April, we will be doing the Honey Bus, and we have, Shelley has found, with great work I might add this year, she has beekeepers, a couple, who will be coming to discuss the book, and yes, they have read the book and want to review the book as well as share their beekeeper life and what they know about bees. So it should be very interesting. Yeah, so anyway, have a wonderful Easter to everyone. Thank you for coming today, and we'll look forward to seeing you in April. Thank you.